Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us for the Van Winkle Virtual Lunch and Learn series. This is the 7th presentation in an 18-part series on a variety of estate planning, estate administration, and elder law topics, with presentations occurring here on Facebook Live at noon every Tuesday and Thursday through November 19th. Today I'm here with my colleague Heather Goldstein, and we will be presenting on the topic of elder exploitation. Heather and I are attorneys practicing in the Trusts and Estates Practice Group here in Asheville, North Carolina at the Van Winkle Law Firm. And the presentation today is based on North Carolina law. The content we will be presenting for you is drawn from common questions that clients often ask, but it is not intended to be legal advice and therefore should not be taken as a recommendation for any particular legal situation. You should certainly talk with an attorney about your own specific circumstances before relying on any broad overview or general information, such as what we are presenting for you here today. I'll now turn it over to Heather, who will give you a brief overview of elder exploitation and its unfortunate significance in our culture.
Thank you, Lucas. I was just thinking it's kind of funny, we're lawyers, and so of course we have to give a minute of disclaimers and legalese at the top of our presentation to be sure that everyone has expectations. But truly we're glad if you're joining us today for this Facebook Live presentation to talk about a topic, older adult financial exploitation, which is essentially reaching epidemic proportions in our society today, and some elements of older adult financial abuse touch the majority of the work that we do as trust, estate, and elder law attorneys, and certainly worth spending 30 minutes of time discussing with you today. So let's just kind of lay the ground about what it is that we mean when we say older adult or elder financial exploitation. There's not actually a single definition in the law, but in general, it sounds like it's what you think it would be. It's the illegal or improper or non-consensual taking of an older adult's funds, property, or assets. When this happens, it usually happens in one of two contexts, either in a relationship where there is an expectation of trust, and we call that a fiduciary relationship. So it's a trusting relationship in which that trust is taken advantage of to the detriment of the older adult. Or it's in a situation where the older adult is actually targeted for exploitation, and they are targeted on the basis of their age or disability. Usually there's an element of deception or intimidation embedded in the exploitation. That deception could mean being untruthful with the older adult, stealing or hiding from them. But sometimes the deception is pretending to care about an adult when you don't really, in order to ingratiate yourself with them and obtain asset transfers in that way. So I mentioned before that I think this is an epidemic, and I want to just give you some statistics about the problem of older adult exploitation in the United States right now. And by the way, some of you spring chickens out there are going to be uncomfortable for me to report to you that if you are over the age of 60, you are considered an older adult under the law, even though I know that this will be shocking news for many 60-year-olds out there. But 5% of all adults over the age of 60 self-report that they believe that they have been the victim of some kind of financial abuse or exploitation, either at the hands of someone they know or someone they don't know, like a fraud or scam. That's 5% of everyone over the age of 60 is an enormous number of people who believe it has happened to them. However, only 1 in 45 of those cases is ever reported or documented. What that means is we have an enormous problem of unreported, undocumented exploitation, which is why people like us are making presentations like this, because we want you to be aware of what it is, how you or someone you love might become a victim, what to look for, and how to prevent it. The annual economic loss in this country from older adult exploitation is at least $3 billion has been quantified. could be as high as $36 billion being taken from older adults. And the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau estimated that between 2013 and 2017, the number of suspicious activity reports involving older adults quadrupled. So the epidemic is on the rise. I'm going to take one more minute, maybe two, just to talk to you about why this is, why older adults are being targeted. And it really, there's two components to it. One is what happens to your brain as you age, and the other is the circumstances under which older adults are for the most part living. So let's talk about brain changes. Hopefully there are no neuroscientists watching this presentation, or I might get a little bit in trouble for how I'm about to translate some of the research that I have read and that I understand based on my practice. But basically you have two kinds of intelligence. You have fluid intelligence, which is your ability to apply rules or logic and to judge trustworthiness and riskiness. It's your problem-solving ability. Unfortunately, for me, on the eve of my 50th birthday, your fluid intelligence peaks at about age 50 and then begins a slow decline for the rest of your life. The good news is, even though your fluid intelligence, your ability to apply rules and logic and judge trustworthiness, even though that's declining, your crystallized intelligence continues to increase until age 70. Crystallized intelligence is essentially wisdom, what you have learned in your life and the ability to apply that learning to new situations. So until about age 70, the increasing wisdom offsets this decreasing problem-solving ability, and you're pretty much okay. But age 70 is on average for most people when cognitive changes can begin to decline in a way that is noticeable. And that is a period of time, the result of the plateau in wisdom and the continued decrease in problem solving in the financial expectation world is that you become disproportionately credulous. Let's say you lose your healthy skepticism. That thing when you were younger made you know if you got an email that said, please click on this link immediately because your bank account has been hacked and we need your account number. Something happens in your brain when you're older and you don't get that same red flag. That makes you vulnerable. In addition to the brain changes, we have two things going on with older adults in our society. One is wealth concentration. We live in a time where most people do not have healthy pensions. Instead, what they have is money that they have saved throughout their whole life to live on when they are older. They are managing this money themselves, and it is large pockets of money, of liquid assets sitting in accounts that these older adults have access to. The other thing that happens, and most exploitation happens to people between the ages of 90, although it can 80 and 90, but it can happen earlier. But a lot of people who are exploited are living alone, they're lonely. And so when you combine this loss of healthy skepticism with loneliness and lack of support and wealth concentration, what you have is a perfect storm for exploitation. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lucas and let him talk to you a little bit about what this looks like.
Thanks, Heather. So I'm going to provide some specific instances or scenarios where exploitation is unfortunately common in our culture. The first scenario, I think we're all very familiar with, it's conduct by family members, which unfortunately where our family members are generally our most trusted and supported allies, there are situations where dishonesty occurs. Gift persuasion is the first area I would like to discuss. And just to give you an example, what I'm talking about here is where an elderly person may have traditionally given a gift to a child or a grandchild each year, but at some point, due to a loss in capacity or cognition, they might start making impulsive multiple gifts per year. This could be done on accident. I think that that's probably quite common. And unfortunately, younger relatives will occasionally take advantage of these mistakes. And they might accept the multiple gifts each year. They might even push their older relative to give them even more, viewing this as just easy money when really it amounts to exploitation. Another instance where gifts can arise in exploitation scenarios is when a family member is the caretaker for an elderly relative, but does not receive formal payment for taking care of the relative. This can create a power imbalance where the elderly person might feel pressure to give gifts, which can be very substantial, to a family member in order to maintain their sense of safety in this ongoing relationship. Another family situation which can create exploitation scenarios is when family members are making loans between one another. And here I'm talking about the older individual making a loan to a younger family member. Often there is a higher level of trust between relatives, which is a good thing generally, but it makes entering and honoring contracts quite awkward and somewhat risky. Family members might not put loans in writing, and rarely are they entered in a formal setting, like an attorney's office, for instance. There might not even be any witnesses present when these agreements are created. And all of this means that there's no written record in many cases that a loan was given. And this leaves little recourse for other family members to get their money back. It also leaves very little recourse for the executor of the older individual's estate once they pass away to enforce a loan and get that money back into the estate to then be distributed pursuant to the older individual's intentions. And this affects, of course, all of the other family members who might have inherited under the elder individual's will or trust. The next area I'd like to discuss is conduct by fiduciaries, which is something that Heather touched on earlier, but I'd like to explain what a fiduciary is, just by way of background. The term fiduciary, it can come up in a variety of settings. It might refer to the trustee of a trust, a financial manager who's investing on behalf of another person, or even the executor of an estate has fiduciary duties. For our purposes here, we are referring to any individual who is entrusted with managing the financial assets of an elderly individual. Some of the risk factors for exploitation by a fiduciary include misappropriation, which is essentially the fiduciary, so that could be a trustee, it could be an investment manager, directing the money to anybody besides the elderly person. So that's directing income or principal on investments. Another risk factor is self-dealing or embezzlement, where the trustee or the fiduciary in general is essentially pocketing the elderly person's money. It could be income from investments, and this can be, generally is done with the belief that the older individual will not find out because they're not necessarily looking over the fiduciary's shoulder at statements, and it's unfortunately easy for a fiduciary to exploit an older individual in this manner. The third risk area that I'd like to discuss is strategic spending. And here I'm talking about Medicaid eligibility. Often we'll draft powers of attorney, which are put in place for Medicaid planning so that people can receive financial assistance for long-term care while still retaining some of their assets. And these powers of attorney that we create in order to do this can be very broad, and they can have a lot of broad authority for agents acting on behalf of the elderly person in order to facilitate the Medicaid qualification as well as the asset protection that they're designed to create. However, this can also create problems where it creates broad authority for the agent, and therefore a dishonest agent can quite easily exploit these powers by making gifts to themselves, for instance, or changing beneficiary designations on accounts. That's another example. The third category of exploitation that I'd like to discuss is conduct by caregivers or friends. This is very similar to the family situation that I mentioned earlier. in that there is often a heightened level of trust between the elderly person and the caretaker or friend. However, it is a bit more risky because there are fewer checks and balances here. Usually the friend or caretaker is outside of the family unit. They don't have necessarily any accountability to the family, and they might not have anybody therefore holding them accountable for their exploitive actions. Gift persuasion, which I mentioned earlier in the family context, can also occur here, as can misappropriation of them directing the older person's assets to somebody besides the older person. Fourth, I'd like to discuss conduct by contractors. So this could be somebody coming to work on an older individual's home. This creates some exploitation risk because contractors don't have any personal or ongoing relationship necessarily with the elderly individual. And also contractors can have varying levels of professionality and skill, which creates a setting ripe for financial abuse through either miscommunication or just general maliciousness. They might do work for inflated prices or not finish the work and then attach a lien, which is a legal right to claim against the property of the elderly individual or the property that was worked on, to prevent its sale or to get paid back from the proceeds of the sale. Finally, and I think this is most familiar, it's at least in the news more than perhaps what I've discussed so far, is the risk of frauds and scams, which specifically target older people, and they're very common both online and over the phone in this culture. For instance, there might be a fraudster or a scammer who gets the elderly individual on the phone and asks them to wire money or purchase counterfeit or valueless gift cards. These actions can be very difficult to undo, if not impossible. Phone and internet scams are equally dangerous. Another situation which is along these lines is new relationships between the elderly individual and a new love interest, who might go so far as to keep the elderly person away from their family members and their loved ones, and thereby reduce the amount of checks and balances that a family network could provide. Just to give a couple of examples of other scam situations, scammers might pose as loved ones of an elderly victim, such as a grandson needing money for bail to get out of jail, even if such a grandson doesn't even exist. Somebody might not have the capacity anymore to realize that. And another could be a phone call from somebody posing as the IRS asking for delinquent taxes and money to be wired directly to some unknown account that's hard to get back. Now, later in this presentation, we will mention some resources which are available to educate elderly individuals and their families about these risks, and also some prevention tools that are available from the state. Heather will now briefly explain why these various types of exploitive conduct are difficult to detect and to stop.
So there's really, as from Lucas's discussion, there are lots of different ways that exploitation manifests itself. There tend to be some recurring difficulties in stopping it once it starts, or in really understanding whether or not there really is exploitation happening. So one of the reasons that there's underreporting, I mentioned it's only 1 in 5 cases are reported, is that often the older adult has some idea that they have been taken advantage of, and they're just embarrassed. They don't want anyone to know that they fell victim to something that in hindsight they may realize they should have been able to understand as an exploitation or a scam. They may be confused. They may actually be led to believe they consented to the transaction, and they may or may not remember clearly whether they did consent. And so they don't know if it's something that they were allowed to happen or not. And then very often, the most common form of exploitation is by family members. That's the number one largest category of perpetrator. Children, grandchildren, siblings have access to financial resources of an older adult. And in almost every case, the older person loves the person that has exploited and doesn't want to get them in trouble. And often the best resolution of cases like this is one that does not result in criminal liability for the person or the loved one that they don't want to get in trouble. There's also I call it right to make bad decisions. If you have an older adult at the end of their life who is spending money in a way that you as an observer or a family member feel is irresponsible, spending life savings on fancy sport cars or other things that they don't really need, or giving it away in a way that you don't think is appropriate or responsible. There's an element of trying to understand we all have a right to make bad decisions. We all have a right to spend our money frivolously. We all have a right to do this. And so it can be difficult to drill down to, is this a person who is just exercising their right to make bad decisions, or is this someone who's being taken advantage of? The key to teasing out these issues of confusion, embarrassment, and the right to make decisions all turns around three legal concepts: consent, lack of capacity, and undue influence. For the sake of time, I'm not going to give you a lengthy definition of each of those terms. I would refer you to one of our earlier Facebook Live sessions on the will caveat. And my partner Steve Ravenstein gave a pretty good discussion of lack of capacity and undue influence as legal concepts that would allow you to set aside a will. They also come to play in exploitation cases. And it goes like this: whenever you allege that an older adult has been exploited, in the vast majority of situations, the person who is accused of exploitation says that it was a consent situation. The older adult knew I was doing it. They wanted me to do it. They asked me to do it even. In order to overcome consent, there are two ways to do that. One is to say that older adult lacked the mental capacity to be able to give informed consent. They couldn't understand the transaction they were consenting to, and therefore they couldn't have given consent. Or even if they were capable of giving consent, they were unduly influenced to give this consent by a power imbalance between themselves and the person who's exploiting them that can arise out of being wholly dependent on that person for care and support in the later years. So those are some of the dynamics that we have to get around. But rather than getting into a situation where exploitation is ongoing and you're trying to get around those dynamics, what we are trying to do with nearly all of our clients who come to see us is to put prevention strategies in place in advance. And that's what Lucas will discuss next. Lucas can't hear you. Try one more time, Lucas. Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me, Lucas? Well, I hate that we're having technical difficulties. I still can't hear you, Lucas. Can you hear me? Okay, you know what? If you can hear me, then I'm just going to kind of continue on, and because we only have about 5 or 6 minutes left. All right, so I was just going to turn over to Lucas to talk about prevention strategies, and we have several, but when we talk to clients about prevention strategies, mostly we're wanting to talk about building a circle of trusted individuals. There is a trade-off between transparency and lack of control over all of your information and protection from exploitation. So you want to build in checks and balances, multiple people that you trust in your life that have the ability to see your finances, who will know if something is going awry. So the most important document in your system of building your trusted individuals is to have a very solid financial power of attorney. It's probably the most important document in your estate plan. Most people think it's their will. I think it's that power of attorney, because the power of attorney is what supports you at the end of your life. If you have the good fortune to live a long time, and life expectancy for human, I think the statistic is if we get to be 65, we have a pretty high chance of getting to be 89 to 92. If we get longevity, the vast majority of us are going to live with some diminished cognitive ability at the end of that time. And so we have to have support, and the power of attorney is how you do it. You want to think carefully about who you name as agent under your power of attorney, and be sure that it's someone that can be trusted. It's also a good idea to consider having the person who has your power of attorney be required to give accountings, either informally or formally, to some other third person who's never going to be your agent. Basically, someone just kind of looking over your shoulder, over their shoulder, being sure that the money is being managed as you would want it to be managed. You also can build in systems for how to remove a power of attorney, remove the agent under your power of attorney, also by a third person. You should know about the trusted persons list. The majority of financial institutions are able to ask you for a trusted person. That is someone that you authorize your bank or financial advisor to notify if they become suspicious that you are being exploited, that your money is being mismanaged, or maybe even that you're just not making clear decisions as they have always known you to make, that you are suffering from some kind of cognitive impairment. Having a trusted person on file with a financial institution doesn't mean that that person is going to get to take over your finances, but it allows the institution to alert someone, which they're otherwise not going to be able to do because they're bound by their contract with you to keep your information private. But if you allow them to call a trusted person, then we have a trusted person who's in a position to take some other action. So you should ask your banks and financial advisors whether they have trusted persons lists and put that on file. You also should freeze your credit. You can do this for yourself, or an agent under power of attorney can do it for you. But there are 3 different credit agencies. If you go to the North Carolina Secretary of State website, in North Carolina, that's Josh Stein's website, and Josh has made fraud and scams and older adult exploitation a huge focus during his tenure. He has a dedicated webpage that will walk you through the process of freezing your credit, and that's something that you should do. All right, the next piece would be what to do if we don't succeed in putting good prevention strategies in place. So I'll just keep talking because we've got about 3 more minutes left, and we'll just tick through the end of this. If we get into a situation where our best prevention didn't work and we believe that we have ongoing exploitation happening, what are the things that can do? There's a number of strategies. Most of them involve going to court. The one that doesn't is to consider whether the older adult still has the mental capacity to actually execute new legal documents, perhaps to revoke their power of attorney if it's their agent who is exploiting, or perhaps to draft a power of attorney if they didn't have one, to allow someone to take over for them. I would say in most cases, when you get to the point where exploitation is ongoing, there are enough questions about cognitive ability that it's harder to execute new legal documents at that point, but it's always a strategy that we want to at least consider. If we can't execute new documents, then if the fraud is by an agent under a power of attorney, then we have remedies, judicial remedies before clerks of court in the state of North Carolina, where we could file a proceeding and we might be able to request an accounting from a trustee or a power of attorney. We could ask that a trustee or an agent under power of attorney be removed if we have enough evidence to suggest that they are taking advantage of their position to the detriment of the older adult. And then we also can go to court and ask for guardianship. We will have a whole other presentation on guardianship that I hope you will tune in, because it is increasingly significant in the exploitation context, but essentially guardianship is going to court and asking that the judge appoint a person to take over healthcare decision-making, personal decision-making, legal and financial decision-making for an older adult who is no longer, well, for any adult who is not able to make or communicate important decisions or manage their own affairs. The last thing we want to discuss before we wrap up here in the last minute are other partners. We've focused this presentation on the work that we do as elder law and estate planning attorneys, but there is a wide network of government and nonprofit and private agencies that are involved in this elder exploitation epidemic, and you should know who they are. First of all, exploitation is a crime in the state of North Carolina, so reporting to law enforcement is always an available option. Also, adult protective services in every community will want, we're all mandatory reporters of adult abuse. And if you think an older person's being exploited, you should call your local APS and make a report. Financial institutions, you should alert banks and financial advisors if you suspect exploitation. They, if there's a trusted person list, then they will call the trusted person. If it's power of attorney abuse, they have the ability to decline to honor the power of attorney. So sometimes banks and financial institutions are able to be a middleman to get and to stop financial abuse when it's happening. And then there are resources like I mentioned the North Carolina Attorney General. If it's a fraud or a scam, they have a hotline they want you to report. The last thing I want to note, because it's 12:30 on my clock, is that we have a elder justice multidisciplinary team here in Buncombe County. It is coordinated through the Buncombe County Council on Aging, but the membership of this group includes lawyers, financial advisors, social workers from Adult Protective Services, law enforcement, and nonprofit agencies, all of whom are working together to put better systems in place to stop exploitation in our community. And if you would like to learn more about this topic, the North Carolina School of Government at UNC Chapel Hill has recently published the legal framework for North Carolina's elder protection system. There is an amazing website and online manual at protectadults.sog.unc.edu. Everything we've talked about here and more, and I send you to that resource enthusiastically if you want to learn more. We're out of time, but please tune in next this Thursday at noon. Our partners BJ Kilgore and Brian Lawler will be doing a session on protecting children with special needs long after you're gone. And all of that could be found at the Van Winkle Law Firm's Facebook page. So tune in on Thursday. Thanks for joining us today. Sorry about our technical difficulties, but on behalf of Lucas, I say goodbye.